back to the No Score Review Show, where we have in-depth critique and nuanced discussion of some of the latest video games, movies, and television. I am your host, Nick Green. Today, we are doing another episode of Franchise in Review, where we are doing the Friday the 13th movies, because I thought it was a great excuse because we finally have a actual Friday the 13th taking place in October this year, in the year of our Lord 2023. I loved watching these films when I was younger, and just thought it was a great excuse to rewatch the movies, especially since then I've picked up the Shout Factory box set and whatnot. I know, Matt, you also have it. Matt, welcome back to the show, by the way. Matt Schmidt is joining me
thanks.
on this episode.
Glad to be here again.
It was a great excuse to do a rewatch of everything. It's been a while. So, if you're new to the Franchise in Review show, the way it works is we'll do a bit of a general thoughts rundown of the movies, what our history with the franchise is, and kind of what we think of it overall. And then we'll probably do, since this is now officially the longest franchise I have covered on the channel, with the most films anyway. We probably won't do a play-by-play of each and every film. We'll probably do more of a grouping of maybe like eras for Jason and Crystal Lake and whatnot. So that's gonna be kind of how it works. So Matt, what's your history with Jason?
Back when I was a kid, I went as Jason for Halloween before I had seen any of the movies one time.
Maybe not before.
Just because, I think you just know these characters just from cultural exposure, I guess, especially with the internet age, everybody knows Michael Myers, everybody knows Jason, everybody knows Freddy Krueger. It's just one of those things that it's like almost universal. You can show a picture of that to any person almost in any part of the world and they'll probably be able to tell you who it is. But the first movie that I watched, I think, was probably Freddy versus Jason.
Okay.
I remember going around and like walking through Blockbuster. I loved going to the horror aisle and just looking at all the covers of the movies that my parents wouldn't let me rent. And eventually I think I ended up watching Freddy versus Jason at like a sleepover or something with some of my friends. And boy, we just ate it up the whole time. It's so much fun. It's like it's like an action movie, really. It's not even like a horror, but it has those horror elements, but it's also kind of funny too. Like, cause Freddy has that sort of, jokey vibe to him that he brings to Jason's kind of stoic side. And then I was just sort of hooked on it from there, and the whole concept of like the long running series. And I loved the slasher, the body count kind of stuff, and just what kind of crazy gore effects and kills are they gonna do. I think that's very naturally fascinating to especially like young boys growing up. You just get like fascinated by this kind of gore and horror things that your parents don't want you to watch. And I remember even as a kid, like I would go on IMDb and just look at the parental advisory warnings for all of the movies. And because they would always give you like really detailed descriptions of every kill that happens in the movie. And you're like, funny. Okay, interesting. Like I should, because like my parents would always go on that and look at it and be like using it to decide whether or not they were going to let me rent a movie. So I'm like, well, if I can't rent the movie, I'm just going to read what happens in it anyway. But then, just became a huge fan. I got the box set. I've seen all the movies at least once, some of them multiple times. And it's just, it's the gift that keeps on giving. A lot of them, they're not good, but they're fun for what they are. And now I've really come to appreciate even the pre-slasher stuff and getting into like Italian giallo films and sort of the path that those films took to give us slashers, and then how slashers went in turn to re-influence the Italian giallo films later in the 80s, and like the cyclical nature of how different genres from different sides of the world were able to influence each other at the same time.
Right.
It's a very interesting part of horror history, I think, and it's super cool to dig into like all the history behind these films. And Friday the 13th was arguably, I mean, I won't say it's the one that started it all, because I think that at least in Western markets probably goes to Black Christmas, because that was in the 70s. Uh,
Hmm.
but Friday the 13th is definitely the one that like popularized it to the degree that it is. And you can tell that just from how many movies are in the genre, or in the franchise, I mean. It's a shame we haven't gotten any new ones recently, but who knows? But yeah, I mean, I love the series. It's so much just good fun, schlocky fun, and yeah,
Yeah, it especially as it progresses, like as the franchise has gone on throughout the years, they've embraced that like fun side to it way more,
for
and
sure.
they just become more and more iterative on each other, and like just become these fun romps to like watch with your friends on like a weeknight or something, or like for spooky season just get together and watch some like schlocky fun horror.
Yeah, like
I
you can
think
turn any of these movies into a drinking game for
totally, yeah.
something. It's like
Yeah.
every one of them is just so enjoyable. It's a good like laugh at, make fun of the screen, and like yell at the
Yeah.
characters kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
oh, don't go in there. He's in the behind the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, because I haven't watched the Nightmare films quite as recently, but I did a pretty recent rewatch of all the Halloween movies, and comparing those two at least, and I love Halloween. It's probably my favorite horror film of all time, but the franchise just is substantially worse than this one. Like, I think this one has way more merit to it of just like embracing that fun, goofy side and just being an overall like better time. I
Yeah,
think
I
the
think
Halloween
Halloween
franchise,
and Nightmare, I think they both peak with their first film and then get progressively worse. Whereas, at
like,
least with Friday, it takes a few films, I think, to reach its peak,
yeah,
and then stays fairly consistent
yeah,
throughout,
yeah, it's a
with
lot of like
some
it
dips. And
dips and then like plateaus a lot of the time. It
yeah,
feels,
but
yeah,
some of the later ones, are even like the goofy ones, like Jason X and Jason Goes
I
to
had such a
Manhattan.
good
Like,
time.
there's so much fun stuff. Like the punching sequence on the rooftop in Jason Takes Manhattan that goes on
Oh
for
my
like two
god!
minutes.
And then he gets
It's
his
hilarious.
head punched clean
Head
off, and
punched
it
off,
slam dunks into a dumpster. It's
and then the lid
uh,
closes.
yeah, yeah, so
Like, that's
ridiculous.
great.
Yeah, at least if it's not offering like a good storytelling or character or whatever you're like hoping for out of those films, that it's like it's a fun like schlock time. It's good. Yeah, my memory of starting with this franchise is a little fuzzy. I don't think I gotten into it until the remake started like doing its marketing back in
Mm,
2009, and I think that's likely what got me into like going back and rewatching all of them. Cuz I think also like cuz I vividly remember in like 7th grade the equivalent of like my emo phase was just being completely obsessed with like all the famous slasher films and horror films of that
yeah,
uh
that's fair.
time, because like I think there was a good run around the 2010s where it was like Friday the 13th, Nightmare, Halloween all getting these reboots
Texas
with
Chainsaw also had a couple in the 2000s as well.
Texas Chainsaw. Yep, exactly. So I think that's probably likely what spurred a lot of my interest to go back and watch all of the like originals and the classics. So yeah, I look back on this franchise fondly, and I am very glad I did a rewatch for these films and like recontextualizing all of them now, especially with having a bit better grasp on like film language and like just filmmaking overall. Because I that's the other thing I think that drew me to a lot of those films is like the filmmaking behind those films is what fascinated me the most, because like I was always obsessed with like Stan Winston and like Jurassic Park and the Terminator and Alien
Right.
movies. So like the special effects and like the just like the amount of work that went into those films always fascinated me. So yeah, I have a new appreciation for the films now as well, seeing them in a new lens, kind of, and being able to appreciate nearly all of them. Like I really only think there's maybe one or two that I would say like just aren't worth the time at all. Like I'd rather just watch, and there's so many of them now too that like you don't really need to revisit all of them
Yeah. And even
necessarily.
though there
So
is like a sort of a storyline that exists between all of them, you can drop in at any point in the franchise and get a fully
absolutely,
formed standalone movie, which I think
totally,
is also great
it is
to
great.
balance that kind of like continuous storyline and also still make everything fulfilling without being like marvelized, where
Yeah,
you need to watch 14 movies of lore to understand what's going on.
totally. Yeah. Well, and like it also helps too that there's a good chunk of those films that do short little recaps at the very beginning of each of the
Also
films
true,
too,
yeah.
right?
That's a good point. I wish more fucking movies did that.
Yeah. It would be great. I don't know
Last
how that would
week
work in a
on,
MC. Yeah, exactly. I don't know how that would work on like an MCU level or if that's even really
they
possible,
just
but
play one of those IGN videos that's like Marvel MCU summed up in 15 minutes,
yeah.
and
Well,
then play
hey,
it during
that
the
could make for
pre-show.
great like yeah, pre-show content that like just catching you up on what you're missing, right? I'd rather see that than just trailers or like actor interviews with the like actors of the film before the movie, you know? But
Yeah.
anyway, that's besides the point. Yeah, really fond of this franchise. Another little note, just for anyone watching, uh, Matt did mention Freddy versus Jason, but we will not be covering Freddy versus Jason in this
Unfortunately.
timeline. I made the judgment call of keeping it separate. I do definitely want to do a kind of re-review of that movie eventually, just kind of give it the space that it deserves, almost. So, just as a sort of housekeeping thing, we'll be doing all 11 movies in the franchise besides that one. So,
Because potential hot take, I think Freddy vs. Jason is the best one
yeah.
out of Nightmare and Friday the 13th
Damn.
series.
The other
Hot
thing I
take.
wanted to say as well is like, I agree with you on Nightmare peaking with its first and like getting worse. But I also think Nightmare is even better sort of than Halloween in a sense, because at least
Yeah.
that one just goes full balls to the wall, like wacky, crazy, fun
True.
time.
Halloween just gets
Whereas
bad.
Halloween just gets bad.
I
It's
think even just
quite
after the
boring.
second, I think the third one is unwatchable.
Third
The one
one,
that doesn't even
well,
have fucking Michael Myers in it.
yeah. I
The
mean,
little
like I
stupid
do,
fucking Goosebumps storyline, the
right.
haunted mask. It's like
I
R.L.
I
Stein
do,
did it better,
yeah.
even
I
though I think he wrote
appreciate
that
what
book
they were
after.
going for, but yeah, it definitely just was kind of
No me
sloppy.
gusta.
Yeah. So yeah, without further ado, that is where we're going to get into our kind of deep dive with these films. Also, kind of spoilers for all of these films. If you haven't seen any of them and are worried about spoilers, I'm not sure why you're this far into this video, but yeah, there will be spoilers ahead. Um, so yeah, so we are going to kind of group them together. We'll talk about kind of the first 3 to 5 films to start with. Um, where do this batch of films? Where does this batch of films land with you, Matt? One to
I think these ones are my favorites. I
you think
like
so?
the first one definitely is it's its own beast. And when I did my rewatch when the Shout Factory discs came in, I definitely you feel very underwhelmed watching the first movie after you've seen, what the series has to offer later.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think it is important to recognize the impact that that one had at the time, and the fact that there wasn't much else that was like that coming out. Uh, and I mean, it's got like so many. It's got homages to like Psycho and stuff like that, with the first person killer things and what they don't show you versus what they do show you, and all that from the killer's perspective stuff. But it really, I don't think, holds up as well
Yeah.
upon rewatching. I will say it is a great looking movie. It is very, I think, well shot for being so low budget at the time, and the Shout Factory, like the restoration that they did on it, is fantastic.
Hmm.
But then, like, I think the second one is probably the best. But I just like, I like the very grounded, sense of these movies where it's just, they don't have all the supernatural elements. I enjoy the campy stuff from later on, but I liked it more when they just played it straight, sort of summer camp terror, and
Yeah.
it's just a guy hunting down teens. I think the characters that get killed in these movies are more well written than some of the other ones later on, because I think they just sort of start recycling the same archetypes after a while, but at least it sort of still felt a little bit fresh in these ones.
Okay.
And yeah, I think they were really just finding their groove, and they were really setting the tone for like an entire subgenre of movies. And you can feel them finding their footing as they go through these, and the kills are just like so inventive, and
Hmm.
the gore effects are so well done. It's just really it's really enjoyable, and you can understand why these movies caused this franchise to blow up, because
Hmm.
it's just really solid in the beginning, and it hooks people enough that they want to see more. And the movies are so easily digestible that you could just like watch one and then watch another right after, and then do like a marathon, because
Yeah.
they're just so well paced for the most part. Yeah,
And
it's just
they get in and
it's a
get
really
out,
good
right?
chunk.
Like, if nothing else, most of these films are under like hour 30, so
Hmm.
it's really efficient with its time. Um, I think Friday the 13th is overrated, the first one. I genuinely think, especially when you like take into consideration like the recaps and stuff we mentioned earlier with the or other films, like there's just nothing for me here that is worth the time. When I also was just praising the fact that it's a short run time, I would rather dedicate that time towards almost any other film in this franchise. Um, it's just like there's it just feels too low budget now. And like there's a couple like innovative creative kills here and there, but just like the characters are almost non-existent at all. So many of the like set pieces are just so goofy and like over like done. um like the only redeeming factor, like even like the first person stuff you mentioned, I appreciate, but also feels very, very heavily relied on. I get that it is in service of doing that kind of like twist towards the end, um, but I still don't think uh, it merit or it like is worth all of that buildup. Um, yeah, it just feels so dated to me now that it's just such a boring watch for me. Like that's one of the
Yeah, it
films
is
I've
pretty
watched.
boring.
Yeah. It's one I've rewatched recently, uh just kind of on its own. And it was just such a egregiously hard watch for me.
But
Cuz
boy, that boat scene at the end.
that boat scene is very good. Very
Whew.
true. And I think like the one thing for me in this most recent rewatch was Harry Manfredini's score. It is like so over the top and like bombastic that like it almost makes up for like the sheer lack of any sort of emotional investment or emotional stakes in
Right.
every scene. Like it's so like crazy, and it feels very like evocative of like silent films using a soundtrack to kind of make up for the lack of a soundscape. Um, But yeah, I just that one it just was such a crazy. It continues to baffle me how this film like spurred an 11 film franchise. Um,
I still will argue. I think it was the second film. I think the first one was successful enough to get a sequel, but the second
okay,
movie is what made people go like, "Oh shit," because like the first movie is not reflective of the series as a whole, but the second movie is like the first one where it feels like that's where the real franchise
I
begins, at least to
okay.
me.
That's a great point. I think I could get on board with that because part two, especially like when we're just talking about this kind of era, part two is easy favorite for me. It's so like it's miles better than the first one, and
Yeah.
it's just so good. It like it fleshes out its characters a little bit more. They actually have some
I
semblance
think
of
it has some of
personality.
the best written ones, like the jock, the guy that's in the wheelchair. I
Yep,
think he's a great character.
he was
Um,
fantastic. Yeah,
and his kill is hilarious too.
so ridiculous, man.
And I like it
Uh,
because it's like it's an era where Jason can still kind of get hurt. Like people hit him, and then he's like, "Ow!" and he's like limping,
yeah,
rather than just getting
just like
hacked to
walking
shit and
through.
just
Yeah,
standing there.
yeah,
It makes it more interesting because it really feels like there's a person
yeah.
underneath that
Well,
bag.
and it also wasn't overplayed to the point yet, right? Where it was like people would hit him, he would stay down for a minute, and then he'd jump back up. Like we didn't have that preconceived notion of like, okay, well, he's just going to get back up.
Right. Yeah. Because later on, you're like, well, we know Jason's not going to get killed
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something. So,
yeah. Um, love the twist at the end with the sweater and the like mother moment. That was a
yeah.
really cool way to end it.
And
Um,
the final, I think it also has my favorite final scare,
yeah,
even
well, that's
more
where
than
we
the
get
first one.
yeah, that's
When
where
you
we get
see
the
his
like
face,
signature Jason jump through the window thing. Because that
yeah,
was something also with this whole franchise rewatch I noticed. That's like a recurring thing that sometimes happens throughout some of
yeah,
the films. It's really cool.
he he will always like it ends with the characters thinking he's dead, and then he'll either like he'll crack open an eye or he'll do
Yeah.
something. But in this one, it's just full on like he's fucking back,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
jumps through that window. I think the second one also has one of my favorite openings as well, with
Oh,
just
right. With
the
the first girl.
survivor from the previous movie in her
Yeah.
apartment, and then that really creepy, suspense sequence. I
It's like
think
a
that
home
was
invasion almost kind
yeah.
of.
I think that's it's so good, and I don't even know if they do they do that in any of the others of having characters come back later on like that, or was that the only instance?
Well, depends on how you mean specifically, because like we
Well,
do have
doesn't
Tommy.
Tommy Jarvis comes back as an adult in a later movie, right?
Yeah, in two later movies, it's that era gets weird because like he's a kid at the end of four, and then he's an adult with like PTSD and mental issues at the like mental camp or whatever, like retreat.
Yeah,
But then six kind of retcons five so that he's completely normal but still has nightmares of Jason, and that's why he's going to like kind of end things.
right.
I think that's the only case though of recurring characters because no one comes back from part two, other than like seeing them again like on the news broadcast in the
Yeah,
next film. But yeah, I think that's about it. So that yeah, only one to really make use of that, which is interesting. Um, yeah, part two definitely is like strong contender. That would be my recommendation for if you have to watch one that's from like the 80s. I would say part two is an easy pick for me.
yeah, because
Um,
they recap the ending of the first movie in it, so you
exactly.
get all of the info that you need without having to sit through that slog of a fucking
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Uh, it's great.
It chops that final act from part one up so that the pacing is like all you ever need for it, and you still even get some of what's her name, Betsy Palmer's performance as well, because like she was only like one of the only kind of highlights of
Right.
the first film
Yeah,
as
well, I
well.
guess her voice comes back. Doesn't she like speak to Jason sometimes throughout the movies where she like
Uh,
I know she does in either the remake or the one that we're not talking about in this episode. I think
well,
in
they recast her in the remake. I don't know if she popped up in Freddy versus Jason.
because I think she speaks to him when he's being reanimated in the forest. She's like telling him, "Oh, your job's not
Right.
done. You need
Yeah,
to
kill for
go
mother or
back."
whatever.
But I think if unless I'm totally wrong, but I feel like I remember hearing her voice like echoey inside the head kind of stuff throughout some of the other movies. But maybe I'm
I
wrong.
Yeah, I don't recall much of her recurring past like part two or three. Um, with Betsy Palmer anyway. Um, so yeah, because I think it gets way more kind of it pushes itself farther away from that kind of core mythology. That's another thing I love about part two is it delves deep into like the kind of mythology of Pamela and Jason Voorhees.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think it distances itself a little bit more and it's more just focusing on Jason and that's it. Um,
And part
but yeah,
two also has the direct homages to um, the
you were
Giallo
telling me
film
about
that
this,
inspired it, Bay of Blood, when they recreate two of the exact kills that were in that movie. The spear through the bed
right?
and
Yep.
the part when the one kid opens the door and then gets the cleaver stuck in the middle of the face are both like
Okay.
recreated perfectly from Mario Bava's movie from, and that was in like 1971 that movie came out.
Wow.
Uh, yeah,
That's
I
crazy.
think I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah. Beyond part two, though, three again didn't really offer much. Like it definitely brings that kind of the pacing and the little bit more developed characters from part two. Um, and it starts falling. This is kind of where you start seeing the like tropes being formed of like the character
Yeah,
archetypes
that
in
one also
everything.
relies on the 3D a lot
It's
too, which doesn't
so much.
translate to regular viewing.
It's yeah, man. It is so you can totally tell how much in its infant stages it was back then. Because
I would have loved to
wow,
see that. Dude, that probably would have been amazing though back in the day.
yeah,
Can you
sure, yeah.
imagine?
The head popping out the eye, coming right at you. Yeah, there's nothing really in part three for me, like unless you really want to see the very first donning of the hockey mask.
True.
Um, although that's technically even off screen. Um, so yeah, it wasn't much there for me. It's pretty shallow. A decent like final girl chase though in part three. Like there's a
Is
good
that the
kind
one
of
out in the rain or is that four?
that. Well, I think it's stormy, but I don't think it's rainy because it they go from the house to the barn, and
Is
then that's where he gets hung in the barn.
which one has the bow and arrow scene? That's what I'm thinking of.
Where the girl gets bow and arrowed in the rain.
Yeah. Is
That's
that
the
the
first
fourth?
one. That's the very first one.
I'm sure it also happens again, I think, in one of the later movies, but maybe I'm
Mm,
it's
I
been
mean,
a
I
hot
know
minute.
it's
Don't
there's
quote me on
one
this.
there. I know there's definitely one in the first one, but I think it might come up again in another film that I don't really remember because it's also like as we go on with the films as well, they don't actually take place at the camp a lot of the
Yeah,
time. So that was something that actually dawned on me with this rewatch as well. But I mean, it makes sense because like lakes can be freaking massive. So
true.
lots of different like settings and stuff, which is fine. But yeah, um,
Also, yeah, Bay of Blood, the movie that inspires it, also takes place at a lake.
oh yeah, very
And there's
very
also
evocative.
a bunch of promiscuous young kids running around as
Well,
well.
I mean, yeah, it just sounds like it's a straight up like rip off of Bay of Blood then.
Bay of Blood. has a lot more going for it, though. Let me
Okay,
tell you.
well,
When you finally watch it, you will not believe the kind of hijinks that they get up to in
oh
that movie.
really? Oh Jesus.
Also has one of the best endings of all time
Damn, okay. I
in that
maybe
kind of
I'll
a
just
movie.
like re-headcanon Bay of Blood as the first Friday the
Yeah,
13th. Um yeah, and then so we're kind of still in the same era. The like final the beginning of the Tommy Jarvis era happens with final chapter. Um I like final chapter more than part 3.
me too.
Uh it's got a much better setup of the like promiscuous teens, and there's a lot of like pretty good dynamics back and forth between them. Much higher body count. We still get like Jason proper with the hockey mask now. It's not like halfway through or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think there are quite a few pre hockey mask kills in part 3, but it kind of relies on that technique they use in the first one of the like first person view. You don't actually see Jason a lot of the time. Um, but in this is the first one where we get proper full head to toe hockey mask Jason, which is
Hockey
great.
mask, flannel, machete,
Yep,
other
exactly.
things.
There were
And
some
also like
prom.
the final kill, Jason getting killed at the end of that one, the
Yeah,
machete
yeah,
sliding through the face.
yeah. That was pretty
Amazing.
brutal. The effects were great. The effects, I will say, are another standout for the first few films. I think they're quite well done, especially for the budgets they have.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, very effective, and not like over the top quite yet. Um, but yeah, there were some promising things with this film. Like we mentioned, recurring characters. It's not a recurring character necessarily, but a character that's related to someone from the previous films popping back up. One of the girls from part 2, I think, her brother
Oh,
uh, is he's the like hitchhiker dude that the main girl picks up, and he's like camping out in a tent, and he's like he says he's hunting bear, but he's in reality going
hunting
after
Jason.
Jason. Yeah,
Right. Yes, I recall now.
a very cool like premise, but it's so like shoehorned in and like not regarded at all. This film does, though, however, speaking of that character, have one of the like craziest lines of dialogue ever. Because when he bites the dust and he's like fighting with Jason in the basement, he screams out, "Oh my god, he's killing me!"
Oh
and
yeah, right.
it's
Uh,
just so ridiculous, man. Um, Definitely embracing more
right.
of that like ridiculousness with this film.
Yeah,
Um
that's where it starts to get a little goofy.
yeah, for sure. Also Corey Feldman is a
True.
good standout in this film as well.
Hmm.
It's too bad we don't really get more of him. He does pop up again in part 5, um, but just as like a dream sequence at the very beginning, so would have been nice to see more of him. um, yeah, speaking of part 5, this will be kind of our transition into from like the 80s era into like the goofy stuff. Part 5 is my least favorite of the franchise.
Yeah, it's probably up there for me
It
too.
earns the badge of skippable for me. Like it's like, especially considering the fact that part 6 just retcons it and you can easily go from final chapter to Jason Lives. Um, like it's just because it tries to do something interesting with Tommy being like plagued with PTSD of that horrific event, and like because also we get that like weird little stinger at the end of part 4 where like Tommy is like potentially gonna be inhabited by the like spirit of Jason or whatever, and he goes all serial killer, right? But like in the rewatch for part 5, Tommy's barely in it at all. Like they set him up as the protagonist kind of at the very beginning. We get that dream sequence flashback and then he's taken to the mental institution, but he like is barely in it at all, and we just get a bunch of no-name people getting slaughtered, which like is great for the Friday the 13th brand of it all or whatever, and the iconic scenes and everything, like what you want from a Friday the 13th. But it's just so hollow, so devoid, and the Tommy storyline is completely wasted. They just do another fake out at the end where like you think he's all better, but then he just goes and like dons the hockey mask again and kills the final girl or whatever, and it's just so stupid. Um,
Yep.
yeah, uh, I I gather you don't have much to say about
I don't have, you said
then.
it all.
Cool.
I
Okay.
can barely remember that movie.
Yeah. As and keep it that way. Honestly, it's
Yeah.
not worth it. But man, what an upgrade we get with part 6, Jason Lives. This is like
Primo.
primo, like right in contention with part 2 for me. It's like top 3 for sure uh of the franchise. Like man, it's like night and day with those films, and what a blessing for them to actually have the sense to retcon part 5. Honestly, the Tommy we get in part 6 is way more compelling. It gives us an awesome protagonist antagonist like force, like fighting a force throughout the film. And like I was just so surprised with how much I enjoyed this film. um Matt, do you want to like jump in at all before I go too tangent
Um,
heavy?
I mean, yeah, I think Tommy's character is probably one of, if not the best written character in the series.
Might
Um,
have to agree, yeah.
aside from Jason, I guess, as a, as an entity.
Hmm.
But yeah, Tommy is the most. He's the most compelling character that we get, and I really wish that they were able to recreate more of that in some of the other films.
Totally.
But yeah, it's like a great return to form. I'm surprised that the fifth one uh, w- didn't kill the franchise in a lot of ways. But I mean, it's probably still made so much money that they could have done whatever they wanted.
Yeah,
But it's
probably.
crazy that it's 6 movies into this series and it's still able to somewhat hold its own
Well, and
with the
just
best of
inject
them.
so much like reinvigoration into it this deep
Yeah,
in, right? Like just so, and I think I mentioned in like my letterbox review or whatever of like who knew that like an effective like tightly written script with a forward momentum and like characters with actual tangible motivations and dynamics would actually help. Like
yeah.
who would have
Well,
thought?
I feel like it's probably after the fifth movie there this had somebody realize like, oh man, that script kind of fucking sucked. Maybe we should hire somebody that's actually a decent writer
Yeah.
and then get something good in our next one.
Yeah.
And then they did.
Yeah. Just so good. Like that is probably the like biggest contributing factor to this being such a great film. It also harkens kind of back, like it goes back to form a little bit. It goes back to Crystal Lake. It brings kids to the camp finally, which like literally no other film does, and
That's
it
true. I
like
forgot
gives
about
it
that.
some like real stakes, which is awesome. I loved that aspect of the film. I wish more of them did that. Um, and like it's actually a surprise that like there's like maybe three counselors through the whole film. Like it's a relatively lower body count, I think. um and yeah, just like all of the characters introduced like come back like regularly throughout the film. They have like great competing like interests and are like constantly butting heads with each other. Like the police chief and Tommy are always like at each other's throats. um yeah, and just like again, like still bringing in what makes the franchise great and still having a good like amount of like kills, like creative kills, and uh like awesome set pieces. A freaking like RV blows up in this one. It's so
Classic.
good. um yeah, it's the one to recommend for sure out of like this kind of batch, I would say.
Oh
um
yeah. Cause I mean, starting from here, it sort of goes downhill.
yeah, yeah, it like because while I did have an enjoyable time with a lot of the like Goofy era ones, a substantial dip in quality from like a script and character standpoint. It's very much just like a, okay, what crazy wacky concepts can we put Jason in, and not necessarily like a new set of characters.
Yeah, it's like it sort of becomes a fish out of water type situation going on from here, and more gimmick reliant,
Yeah, yeah. Jason
instead of
definitely becomes
making
more of
like
a
an actually well
protagonist.
written thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. I guess Jason kind of does become almost like the hero in a sense in
yeah,
some of the later, especially Manhattan. It's
yeah.
just the way that I mean, the whole title alone, Jason Takes Manhattan,
Well,
is
exactly
kind of
right.
telling
Well,
of
yeah, like
where
Jason,
their
yeah,
angle
goes to
is.
hell, right?
Jason goes to hell. Jason takes Manhattan.
Yeah,
I guess the New Blood is a little different,
yeah. But I
but that
mean,
also has fucking telekinesis and shit in it, and mind reading.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, it's a big dip in quality, but
and
like
Jason goes to space. Can't
Jason goes
forget
to
that.
space. Nope. Yeah, the Goofy era, like tell it, like, it shouldn't work, but it weirdly does. Like it's like, say what you will about New Blood, but like Carrie versus Jason is pretty compelling to watch. It's pretty entertaining.
I agree.
So, um, yeah,
It's
there's
just like
an
it feels like a different series almost at that point,
yeah,
though, right? It's like all the movies are so tonally and conceptually different. It starts to lose its cohesion a little bit, and you
yeah,
can, yeah, it's mostly complete standalone entries at that point. Like Crystal
exactly.
Lake, never heard of it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, they that's also kind of what feeds into the anthological nature that you kind of touched on earlier, Matt,
yeah,
is like, because they're so individual and singular from one another, it that just begs for you to just be able to jump in at any point, right? It's so inconsequential to have seen any of the other ones. You can just jump right in.
yeah,
Yeah, I had a really good time rewatching New Blood. It is definitely far from the worst of the series. Um, Jason Takes Manhattan. I because like, if you're judging it on title, like judging a book by its cover, effectively, it's a bit of a letdown because the first two acts aren't in New York at all.
yeah. That's true. A
Um,
lot of it doesn't even take place in Manhattan.
yeah, like if it was like part eight, Jason takes a cruise, I would be way more.
Jason on a riverboat.
Yeah, exactly. Um, because like the Jason on a boat stuff is cool, like it's well done and interesting, but it's just that like kind of promise of leading you on to like see Jason wreak havoc in New York, um, paired with also because like I know there a bit of suspension of disbelief is required for these films if it wasn't apparent by now. Um, for
Yeah, when
some
like
reason,
Jason's standing in the middle of Times Square with a machete and nobody fucking says anything about like, hey, somebody call 911. This dude's got a weapon.
yeah. Well,
It-
I think it also plays with that kind of stereotype of New Yorkers being so like
that's true.
individualistic and be like, I don't give a shit what's happening next to me, right?
Yeah, just head down, walking forward.
Yeah. Um, but what I wanted to say was the suspension of disbelief is there, but for some reason, I get so hung up on the fact of how the hell did Jason go from a landlocked lake to getting on a cruise ship to going to New York? I something just like rubs me the wrong way about that so
He
much.
hitchhiked.
Well, he literally like Grand Theft yachts his way onto the cruise ship basically because somehow a yacht got onto Crystal Lake, and then he takes that to like a cruise port, whatever, it doesn't matter ultimately, but I
Yeah,
get
they're
hung
just,
up on it every time.
well, I think the whole idea behind those movies is that they thought people weren't paying attention, so they didn't bother trying to
Right,
write a cohesive
totally.
story. It's just like something to put on at a drive-in, and then people will be talking or couples will be making out, and then they stop and pay attention when there's a kill on
Right.
screen, and then like not pay attention. It's asking you to not ask questions and just
Yeah,
really take it for what it is and just
totally.
accept it.
Yeah. It's also got some really m- mind-boggling stuff too, because like I don't know if you remember much of the ending, but like they do like a sewer chase sequence and they like
Yeah,
finish Jason by like drowning him in toxic sewage sludge basically.
yeah,
But then it goes so weird, and like once the sludge kind of like goes away, you see like naked kid Jason curled up in a little ball, which it was just such a weird way to end the
yeah. Well, they
movie.
were really leading into the supernatural aspect
Yeah,
of things, getting ready for Jason Goes to Hell, when
totally.
he's
Yeah.
90% of the movie he's a lizard running
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. I mean, like looking back on this one now, it is like I totally get the complaint of not having him uh like in his traditional garb throughout most of the movie, but I do at the same time commend this movie for going so like far in a different direction and having like a possession slasher like twist to it. Um
Yeah,
but
I think that, I can give them that, but for them to do that on what was supposedly going to be the last movie,
mm,
it's so like not giving the audience what they want out of
that's
this.
true.
Like, you want, if it's going to be the final Friday,
Yeah.
then
Yeah, hindsight's 2020, I guess.
you want it to be Jason going all out and having the biggest, best kills and have an explosive finale. But it's not really the kind of movie that I think a lot of people probably wanted going into it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and me
Absolutely.
included. As a kid, I was like, what the fuck is this? That's probably a contender for my least favorite.
Really? Okay. Yeah,
That
I
and five and uh maybe the first one too.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. It does feel important to kind of take that into context as well, especially like we talk about judging a book by its cover. Jason Goes to Hell sounds like a really cool movie where it's
Mm-hmm.
him in hell slashing up demons or whatever, right? Or just like the absolute worst of the worst of humanity, right?
Yeah. Although
Um,
I will say the final shot, probably in the theater, that was probably like a Captain America picking up
oh
Thor's
yeah,
hammer kind of
I
moment, when you
bet.
see Freddy's claw come up
Hell
and
yeah,
pull
dude.
the fucking mask down. Oh
Yeah,
my god, the people must have gone bananas
yeah,
at that shit.
totally. I wonder how many of them were just like checked out and then being like, wait, what is happening right now? Yeah, looking back on it with that like hindsight, I found things to appreciate, and it's just an absolutely batshit insane movie. Like I truly thought because of the like military SWAT team going to Crystal Lake and like blowing Jason up, I thought it was gonna do one of those things where it like pans over to see a film crew being like cut and like resetting it all, but no, it just keeps like going. They use fucking missiles on him. It's
Yeah,
insane.
that part is pretty fun.
It's so funny. Um and it's like a cool kind of like bait and switch of like seeing this one lone girl go to Crystal Lake and like you think she's gonna get all chopped up, but then you see like all the floodlights come on and a huge team with like AK-47s come out and everything. um yeah, it's wild. And it doesn't let up from there, honestly. Another little note I made, just such a weird moment, because like he needs the whole like premise of it is Jason's spirit or whatever it is can like hypnotize people and possess them, and he needs to jump from body to body until he lands in another Voorhees. And they did another retcon where apparently he has a sister. It's kind of like Halloween 2.
Yeah.
um
A
but there's
sister that has somehow by this point
Never
not
been mentioned.
aged
Oh
and never
yeah,
been mentioned, because
yeah,
she's relatively young, and it's what, this movie came out in the 90s too, right? So
yeah,
it's like Pamela's been dead for 15 years already.
yeah. At least, yeah. So, but yeah, there was just such a weird scene where the current dude that was possessed, I think is like the coroner or whatever, he kidnaps a cop. But then it cuts to the Voorhees house because apparently they had like a home in the suburbs. Um, it cuts to the Voorhees house and it's in this living room, all dark with the fireplace like backlighting them. And there's this weird ass like BDSM contraption of the cop butt naked strapped to the table. And it's just a scene of the coroner shaving the dude's mustache and beard off and then possessing him. It's
Wow.
so fucking weird, man.
I don't even remember that.
And it was so
Maybe they
bonkers.
cut that out of the TV version when I watched it.
Maybe. Yeah. My God, it was just insane.
But
Yeah.
it also has that amazing, like the body melting scene,
Yeah. I
right?
love the
Which is
special effects
so
in this one were very well done.
so wild. It's like a Cronenberg, very out of place
Totally.
for the Friday the 13th series, but like as far as gore effects go, that's probably the best one
I think
in
so.
the entire series. Aside from maybe the liquid nitrogen face smash
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Jason X, which is also fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
Uh, those two,
Um,
I think, are my two favorites.
totally. Yeah. Uh, yeah. And then also just like the effects of the actual like worm demon thing as well, because it like jumps out of one of the bodies and like starts crawling around and
Yeah,
everything. Um,
it's like a little baby xenomorph
yeah,
inspired
exactly.
thing.
Yeah, it's bonkers time. If you really want just like absolute schlock, then Goes to Hell is a great contender. Um,
Although I do think, as far as movies in the series go, that one most benefits from having seen the other ones,
how
just
so?
because of like the way that they sort of like approach it with the beginning of like playing on your expectations of, oh, this little girl's going
Mm,
over, and
okay, yeah,
then they sort of like flip everything and having it be like, there's, oh, a long lost relative, and all this. It's sort of hoping that you're familiar with at least some of the lore
right.
ahead of time, and especially with that finale,
That's
you
true.
will appreciate it more having seen more of the franchise, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas with a lot of the other ones, except for maybe the ones, maybe 6 and 4 having Tommy linked in it, uh, all the other ones like are way more self-contained.
hmm Yeah, yeah, that's true. And it is a little ironic you say that too, because like it would benefit the most from like diehard fans who've seen them all, but then it would also be those diehard fans who might be the most disappointed with
Yeah,
how
well, it's also the least like all of the other movies too, which is
right.
also why I think it's not a good one to watch on its own, because it doesn't reflect the energy
That's true.
and
Yeah.
the format of the series as a whole. Same with the first one. The first and the last are totally different from everything in between.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, one more kind of this era a little bit until we get to the remake. Jason X
Wow.
goes to space. I mean,
Magnificent.
yeah. What
It's
did you
another
really
gimmick,
expect?
but
Yeah,
it's
I think
just
it still
fun.
works though. Like
It does.
it
It really
executes
does.
what it's going for very well. It's just like so campy, like really leaning hard into just like the dumb one-liner characters. Lots of cool kills. The drill scene with the body
Mhm.
spinning down. He's screwed. um, the upgrade, the like cyborg Jason is so cool. I
Yep.
love the like VR scenes that they do. That's really fun. They do like Jason kills the guys first, but they're still reacting. He like one dude's cut in half and he's like, "Oh man, why did you do that?" And then like it like morphs out and they're on the ground with controllers and everything and then he kills them again. It's awesome. You even get like a
Yeah.
tiny, like he goes to space, but you get that tiny little bit of Crystal Lake, right, with the virtual girls in the sleeping bags, right?
Yeah.
That's a nice little mention.
I'm
Um,
also just a sucker for like that retro future aesthetic, like what people in the 90s and before thought the future would look like. And
totally.
then like all the pre CG days. So people would actually need to make all these futuristic contraptions out of the tech that they already had. And
Right.
it's just so, it's such a fun time of
Yeah,
like movie making.
it
And
really is.
yeah, it's just such a fun, such a fun movie to
It
watch.
is. It's so fun. You mentioned Cronenberg as well. We get a David Cronenberg cameo at the very
Also
beginning.
true. Yeah.
So wild.
Oh, great.
Yeah, man. Jason X, like, I think that one is the one to recommend for just pure like schlock. Um,
Yeah.
again, like it kind of requires that like past knowledge, um, a little bit, but it's
But
also
I,
just like
yeah,
very divorced from everything
I
as well.
think honestly, the average person knows enough
Yeah,
about Friday the 13th where you're like, you'll get it.
yeah, yeah. Very true. But yeah, and then we kind of there's a bit of a hiatus for a few years until they started doing a lot of reboots and remakes for famous horror icons. And we
Hmm.
get Friday the 13th in 2009, which, like I said to you before, Matt, this might seriously be my favorite because, like, when you mentioned when you think of like that Friday the 13th DNA, like Crystal Lake, promiscuous teens up to no good, Jason in a hockey mask killing said teens, like it really, I feel like it might be uh the one to go with, especially
Yeah.
because it's so efficient with everything. It has such a variety of locations and kills. It's got a like a half decent like emotional backbone with Jared Padalecki's character, um, the like brother sister story. It does a fantastic job of like doing like paying homage to the original films and doing kind of that same sort of recap that a few of them have done in the past as well, of doing like touching on the major beats of like Jason's mom getting decapitated, the machete, doing some baghead Jason as well. You get like signature kills that were kind of like revolutionized from past films of like the sleeping bag, but
Yeah.
then you also just get that fresh coat of paint as well, and kind of remixing Jason a little bit more. He's not it. It kind of harkens back to that more grounded nature that the original films had, making him more of like a uh, like what's the word? Just like a abled hunter, and like
Yeah. Like he still somewhat feels like a human being
yeah,
underneath that. Like there's a hope that maybe he can be stopped.
hmm yeah,
Although, as we know, by the end of it isn't true. But it
right,
definitely, yeah, it's more of like a stripped back, going back to the basics of like, okay, what really worked
hmm
in this franchise,
and then just like amping that up
and
because it
amping
is
it up.
brutal. It's got some
Oh yeah.
brutal kills in there.
And it starts off so strong. It's like you're not getting that, maybe one person gets killed in the opening scene and then we got to wait 30 minutes for something to happen. It
Hmm
starts off with a bang
Yep,
and then it just keeps going.
yep,
And like the scene with the boat is fantastic.
so good.
Um, the whole, yeah, like the sleeping bag bit that you mentioned has to be one of the most brutal kills of the whole franchise, and it's like in the
Hmm
first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah,
I think it also has one of the best like ending jump scares as well when he comes
hmm
through the dock at the
yep,
end.
yep. You
It
get a
just really
signature window crash as well towards the
signature
end.
window crash, right.
Yeah,
And it's just it's really solid for what it is, and it's kind of like one of the last slashers really of that era before we kind of got into the postmodern uh time with when Cabin in the Woods came out in like 2010 or 2011, whenever
Yeah.
that was. Was sort of like the finisher of that genre in a lot of ways, and now
Hmm.
we've got this whole like neo slasher um, time. Uh, but that movie was kind of like the last slasher of its kind in like the traditional sense,
Hmm.
and I don't understand why it got a lot of hate and why it didn't end up bringing more sequels afterwards. Like it, I thought it was pretty solid. I'm gonna look up quickly what the box office returns were like for that
Because
one.
like a lot of, I think there was just a general disdain because I did read a few like other reviews like on Letterboxd and whatnot. I think there was a general
Dude,
disdain.
it made
Did it make
five
money?
times its budget. It was 19 million
Huh.
and it made 92 million.
Yeah, I don't know.
Why did that
Maybe
not get a sequel?
it, because it arguably is the most deserving of all of those remakes. Like I think it might be one of the best slasher or just horror remakes ever, in my
Definitely.
opinion.
I think so.
Um,
It's better
it's
than
also from the same
the
team.
Nightmare one.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's from the same team that did the Texas Chainsaw remakes in like the early 2000s.
Right, yeah, the 2003 one, which
Yeah,
I
I
thought was
remember.
actually okay. That's the Jessica Biel one.
Yeah,
I
I
thought that
remember
one was
liking those
solid.
as well.
I kind
So
of
yeah.
liked the beginning as well.
Hmm.
That
That
was
was a
all
nice
right.
prequel.
It was a good prequel. I really liked how they leaned into the like the found footage aspect and like the black and white going into the basement type
Yeah,
documentary approach to it
yeah,
was pretty neat.
that
But
was fun.
different franchise to
Yeah,
review another time.
different video. Yeah, I it just doesn't get much better. Like I do have that kind of nostalgia, rose tinted glasses a little bit with it, but yeah, I when I think of, I should say, like Crystal Lake, Jason in a hockey mask killing teens, like this is it's hard pressed for me to pick a better one. Like if you really want to kind of delve into the like catalog and the history, and you want that more tangible like 80s feel, then I would say like part two or part six. But if you're not as picky, then the remake, like the characters too, and the writing, like people complain a lot that they're like stupid and they're very archetypal and everything, and like
But
they
they're all
are,
like that.
they're all like that, yeah. And I
And
think
yeah,
they're like the friend group in the beginning with like the sleeping bag kill and everything, totally bought into like their dynamic, and like they felt like a friend group. Sure, they're like being kind of crass and everything or whatever, but like the banter back and forth between all of the characters was like very well done. So yeah,
yeah, I
I
think
don't
if
know.
they took like that script and made it in the 80s, people would probably think it's the best one. But I think people look back on the old movies with this sort of, that rose tinted glasses kind of feel. And sure, it doesn't have the same kind of aesthetic. And I don't know how much of the like the gore and stuff in the remake was practical versus maybe there was a little bit of CG blood or something that
Mm,
went in. Could be. Um, but like if you just made that movie 30 years prior,
yeah.
it would stand out and people would probably say it was great. You take any of the old ones, make them now, people would think they're garbage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I there's definitely just a disconnect there, and old fans are not going to like the new movie, and
Hmm.
maybe because it was such a dated sort of concept of a slasher movie by the time it came out, it wasn't able to capture new audiences,
Right.
perhaps. But I think I've got a soft spot for that genre of movie, and I think it definitely is the best of the remakes. Although I
Yeah.
also do have a soft spot for Halloween 2 by Rob Zombie.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think it's pretty
Hmm.
good, honestly.
Yeah. Yep.
Because it
That's the
also
one.
like came out when I was getting into these movies too. So I was
Yeah.
like, I
Very
was
impressionable
I was
age.
like 12 years old when this movie came out, and
Yeah.
I had just seen Freddy versus Jason a few years before that, and
Hmm.
I was into it.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely made an impression on me. I I hold that one near and dear, and it'll probably still be the one I recommend to people. It's the most. I mean, they're all accessible to an extent, but yeah. Um, I think that is where we'll wrap it up for this franchise in review.
Hmm.
Um, please let us know what your favorite entry is in the Friday the 13th franchise. Do you love the early 80s ones? Do you love the schlock of the genre? Do you love part five and are just kind of an underdog? Please let us know. Uh, tag me on all the socials or just comment down below. I'd love to have a discussion on this lovely Friday the 13th. This video should be uploaded on said date. So happy Friday the 13th to you all. Please be sure to continue to stick around the channel. Before I do my plugs, though, Matt, where can the people find you?
People can find me on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/wisdom nugget.
Excellent. And yeah, you can find me wherever you're listening to or watching this No Score review show. The franchise and reviews are actually exclusive to the YouTube channel, so make sure to keep an eye out there if you like the franchise and reviews. They seem to be the higher performing videos actually, at least
Hmm.
in terms of like view counts and whatnot. Which I mean, I guess makes sense. Um, so yeah, stick around for more of those. I don't think I have. I guess the only one I can actually think of that would be on any sort of horizon would be the DCEU because we're getting the second Aquaman film at the end of this year.
Hmm.
So I was thinking about doing one final kind of rewatch just to see where I stand with all of those films. And man, that is going to be a bummer, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that'll be on the horizon. Otherwise, stick around for more spooky movie reviews. I'm going to be reviewing Five Nights at Freddy's later this month. I might try and do a review for Exorcist Believer and Saw X as well. In terms of past reviews, I did one for The Nun 2, and for I think the one before that in terms of horror was The Last Voyage of the Demeter. I also have another horror related franchise and review. The Conjuring universe was recapped on the channel earlier in September. So go check that out if you haven't already.
Does
Otherwise, you can
that
find
video include the 8 Annabelle movies?
it sure does. That's also the longest franchise and review. That went for twice as long as this one.
Oh
So
my god. Well, I mean, yeah,
yeah,
you got a lot of ground to cover there.
a lot of ground to cover. A lot of tangents as well, weirdly.
I believe
But
it.
yeah, yeah, thank you all so much for watching and listening. Reach out to me on the socials at No Score or at No Score Reviews. I'm on Letterboxd as well with those handles. Thanks again so much for watching. Matt, thanks for joining me on this franchise and review.
Thanks for having me again. Always glad
Always
to be
a
on the
pleasure.
show.
Indeed. And we'll see you all in the next review. Bye bye.